Welcome and thank you for joining us today. As pressures mount on companies to decarbonize, organizations are looking for solutions that are available today and that work within existing infrastructure and that stand up both technically and from a regulatory perspective. So, in today's discussion, we focus on biomethane. My name is Lee Caplen and I'm a corporate climate advisor at Nvalue. In my role, I support clients in navigating sustainability regulation, helping translate policy requirements into practical long-term climate strategies. Joining me today to discuss how this works in practice is our biomethane expert, Davis. As Nvalue's business developer for future fuels, Davis brings a background in commodity trading and works closely with industrial and transport players on the practical realities of decarbonization.
Thank you, Lee. Great to be here.
All right, let's dive straight in. So when we talk about biomethane in the EU context, what are we really referring to and why has it become so relevant in today's decarbonization debate?
Well, biomethane is a renewable gas produced by refining biogas derived from organic waste streams such as agricultural residues, food waste, and wastewater. Through this upgrading process, the gas reaches the same quality as natural fossil gas, which means it can be injected directly into the existing infrastructure, existing gas networks, and used in boilers, industrial processes, and transport without any equipment changes. It can be stored and used when needed, making it particularly relevant for sectors where electrification remains challenging. When produced and certified in line with the EU sustainability criteria, it delivers high greenhouse gas savings and plays a growing role in EU climate policy, including under the REPower EU, the EU's plan to reduce the dependence on fossil fuel imports while accelerating clean energy deployment.
Right, so which pieces of EU legislation are actually driving biomethane deployment today? And how do they translate into action at member state level?
Well, at EU level, biomethane deployment is being driven by a combination of climate, energy, and industrial policies. One of the key frameworks is the revised Renewable Energy Directive, known as RED III. This sets a EU-wide targets for renewable energy to reach 42.5% of final energy consumption by 2030. Biomethane counts directly towards this target, and member states are required to reflect RED III objectives in their national legislations, which is now shaping how quickly and at what scale biomethane projects are developed locally. In parallel, the EU emissions trading system has entered in phase 4, expanding its scope and tightening emission caps across more sectors. As compliance costs increase, companies covered by the ETS are actively looking for low carbon alternatives to fossil fuels, and certified biomethane offers a way to reduce emissions without fundamentally changing existing processes. So, and when we look at the national level, this is reinforced through national energy and climate plans. These plans set out how each member state intends to meet the EU climate targets and typically include specific expectations for biomethane production and use within their energy mix. So taking all these aspects together, these policies make biomethane particularly attractive because it enables emissions reduction using existing gas infrastructure, avoiding the need for large-scale equipment replacement or network upgrades.
Now, mentioning the EU ETS and staying on that topic, from an EU ETS perspective, how is biomethane treated when it's used in ETS covered installations, and why does that matter for compliance?
Well, for those of you who may not be fully familiar with what is meant by the ETS covered installations, Lee is essentially referring to industrial or energy producing facilities that fall under the scope of EU emissions trading system, such as power plants, heat generators, combined heat and power units, and large industrial boilers. These installations are legally required to monitor their CO2 emissions and surrender EU allowances accordingly. From an EU ETS perspective, the key point is that when biomethane is combusted in an ETS covered installation, it is counted as zero emissions for compliance purposes, provided the biomethane is certified in line with the Renewable Energy Directive. This means that the operators using biomethane do not need to surrender EU allowances for the emissions associated with that fuel use. In practical terms, this can materially reduce an installation's exposure to the EU ETS market. It applies across a range of uses, including heat production, combined heat and power, and other combustion-based industrial processes. As a result, the biomethane is not only a decarbonization option, but it's also a compliance and cost management tool, allowing companies to hedge against the EU ETS price volatility while remaining fully aligned with the regulatory requirements.
Okay, and what documentation is required, and how do ETS covered operations demonstrate zero emissions from biomethane in practice?
To claim zero emissions under the EU ETS, operators must hold a valid proof of sustainability, demonstrating that the biomethane meets the Renewable Energy Directive sustainability and greenhouse gas saving criteria. In practice, this is implemented through the operator's ETS monitoring plan, where the use of Renewable Energy Directive certified biomethane is explicitly declared. Biomethane volumes must be fully traceable and matched to proof of sustainability documentation via verifiable mass balance and chain of custody systems, typically managed through recognized voluntary certification schemes integrated into the Union database like ISCC or REDCert. During annual emission reporting, third-party verifiers assess the consistency between fuel consumption data, proof of sustainability documentation, and registry records. Without a valid proof of sustainability, biomethane is treated as a fossil gas for the ETS reporting purposes.
And looking at the financial impact, what are the financial impacts of using biomethane in ETS covered installations?
Well, if we see that the EUAs are trading between 80 to 100 euros a ton of CO2, switching from fossil gas to certified biomethane can yield a significant compliance cost reductions. Example, replacing 10 gigawatts of natural gas, which is approximately 2,000 tons of CO2, with biomethane saves approximately 180,000 euros for EUA costs. But biomethane, of course, is not coming for free. And the biomethane costs are coming close to the cost of EUAs, but there are many advantages more for the biomethane, like tax exemptions for biomethane use, and etc. But that you have to look case by case.
And in which ETS sectors can biomethane be used, and how does ETS2 change demand dynamics across the EU?
Now, I can answer that in two parts. So firstly, the power and industrial combustion sectors, as mentioned before, and biomethane is also relevant in the ETS from 2028, which will cover heating and transport fuels. Utilities can substitute fossil gas with biomethane in district heating, combined heat and power, and industrial supply contracts to reduce the ETS liabilities. ETS2, effective from 2028, will apply to buildings, road transport, and small-scale industry not already covered by ETS1. Obligations will shift from emitters to fuel suppliers, who must surrender allowances based on the carbon content of the fuel sold, which will create direct economic incentives to replace fossil gas and liquid fuels with low emission alternatives. Biomethane becomes a cost-effective compliance fuel if it is Renewable Energy Directive certified. As for the second part of your question, under the both ETS1 and ETS2, biomethane is treated as zero emissions if accompanied by valid proof of sustainability. In ETS1, the end user installation benefits directly. In ETS2, it is the fuel supplier who must document the use of biomethane to reduce their EUA surrender obligations. The financial driver shifts downstream. Producers and traders must structure contracts with traceable proof of sustainability to monetize the ETS to benefit.
And are there any limits to where biomethane can be used within the ETS, or is it just broadly accepted and applicable across the covered sectors.
Well, fuel suppliers will be able to lower their ETS2 liability by blending or substituting fossil gas with RED compliant biomethane. Certified volumes reduce the calculated emissions from delivered energy. This opens a demand for mass balance certified biomethane in residential gas, public transport fleets, and commercial heating networks. Without a valid proof of sustainability, no greenhouse gas benefit can be claimed. Eligibility is strictly document driven.
So far we've focused on biomethane primarily through regulation and compliance, particularly within the ETS and ETS2. But for many companies, compliance markets are only part of the picture. Beyond regulation, organizations are also considering how biomethane fits into corporate carbon accounting, target setting, and voluntary reporting under international standards, particularly such as the GHG Protocol. So how does biomethane use affect corporate GHG inventories under the GHG Protocol specifically?
Well, under the GHG Protocol, biomethane accounting depends on physical delivery, and this remains an evolving area. Where biomethane is physically delivered and consumed, combustion is treated as bioenergy. Biogenic CO2 is reported separately from the scopes and is not counted as Scope 1, fossil CO2, while methane and nitrous oxide emissions remain reported in Scope 1, if that makes sense. For grid-injected biomethane supplied via common gas networks, current interim GHG protocol guidance does not allow Scope 1 emissions to be adjusted using certificates alone. Companies must report Scope 1 combustion emissions based on their grid average fossil and biogenic mix, while market-based rules for fuels are under review. Biomethane use and certificates may still influence Scope 2 and Scope 3 disclosures and narrative reporting, but detailed accounting rules are being revised. Importantly, the GHG protocol is undergoing its first major revision since 2015, finally, including the developments of the land sector and removals initiative guidance expected later this year. This work explicitly covers bioenergy, biogenic emissions, and the treatment of certificates, signaling that the current Scope 1 restrictions are interim rather than fixed.
What documentation do companies need for these voluntary GHG claims?
Well, the documentation must be robust and fit for purpose. Guarantees of origin or equivalent renewable gas certificates can support disclosure claims on renewable gas use, where they are exclusive, traceable, and appropriately time and geography matched. Where companies wish to demonstrate life cycle greenhouse gas performance, proofs of sustainability or equivalent chain of custody documentation are required, particularly when aligning with regulatory or compliance frameworks. Our claims should remain auditable and consistent with the positions of frameworks such as Science Based Targets Initiative, CDP, and CSRD. These instruments support transparency and disclosure, but not currently enable Scope 1 re-accounting under GHG Protocol rules.
And how does this affect companies with science-based targets or net zero goals, if at all?
Well, for target setting, this distinction between physical supply and certificate is critical because GHG Protocol does not currently allow market-based accounting for Scope 1 fuels. SBTi does not recognize biomethane certificates alone as a way to reduce Scope 1 emissions. Physically switching from fossil gas to biomethane can reduce reported fossil Scope 1 emissions, provided bioenergy is accounted for in line with GHG Protocol, land sector guidance including separate reporting of biogenic CO2. At the same time, ongoing GHG Protocol revisions indicate that the role of certificates in the Scope 1 decarbonization remains under active consideration. So for now, credible SBTi aligned and net zero strategies rely on physical fuel switching and conservative accounting, while closely tracking forthcoming guidance that may enable more flexible treatment in the future. That's the dream.
Now, what are the roles of guarantees of origin and proof of sustainability in ETS and voluntary markets?
Well, Guarantees of origin tracks origin and volume of renewable gas used for disclosure and voluntary claims. Proof of sustainability required under Renewable Energy Directive, Emissions Trading System, or THG compliance includes feedstock, greenhouse gas emission savings, and chain of custody. GEO's guarantees of origins alone are insufficient for ETS. Proof of sustainability is mandatory because it provides the actual proof of sustainability.
And when talking about these gas guarantees of origin, can certificates be traded cross-border?
Yes, but transfers are limited by registries that are connected. When Union database will be operational for biomethane, these borders will come down and the market will be more unified and more accessible. Guarantees of origin can be traded under EECS, but member state recognition may vary.
Now, who exactly is demanding these biomethane certificates, or just biomethane in general, and why?
Well, industrial ETS covered sectors like steel, chemicals, paper, and glass seek to reduce the EUA liabilities. Utilities buy biomethane to decarbonize heat supply and deliver green gas to clients. And price signals in ETS are accelerating shift to certified biomethane in long-term energy contracts because the ETS prices are pretty volatile. And of course, if we talk about compliance markets, then the biggest buyers and the biggest market drivers are road and marine transport. And in multiple countries, there are strong schemes that support this development.
What are the key challenges to biomethane integration in the ETS?
Well, first of all, I think the biggest challenge across the board in biomethane is lack of harmonized proof of sustainability recognition across member states. And that goes hand in hand with incomplete union database functionality, inconsistent treatment of biomethane in national inventories, and guarantees of origin are not recognized in all national quota or tax frameworks.
And in your opinion, what's needed to scale biomethane in ETS use?
Well, first of all, we need the market drivers. And one of the biggest one is that each European country on national level enforces the Red Tree and implements laws that support it. Full operational readiness of Union database, because it's been promised for the last 2 years and it's functioning just for some fuels, for SAF and other fuels, but for biomethane it's still on a trial. And cross-border proof of sustainability transfer protocols, but that will go hand in hand with Union database. And of course, clear ETS guidance on zero-emission fuels and documentary proof requirements.
Okay, and then I think related to that question, what are the impacts of certification bodies on biomethane markets?
Certification bodies and auditors play a crucial role of building a trust in the markets. We need strong guardrails and verification to avoid double counting and keep the faith in the market strong. On recent development, there was a new ISCC guidance of mass balance rules that ensure greater transparency, compliance, and alignment with the Red Tree requirements. You'll likely see an increased administrative tracking for biomethane pathways, particularly if your work involves liquefaction or compression or grid injection or international biomethane trade. But I cannot stress this enough that while it might take more time to prepare documents or to prepare for audits, the market, one of the biggest market pillars is trust in the market, trust in the product, trust in the transparency, and trust in the sustainability of the product itself.
So ultimately, biomethane plays a practical role across the EU ETS compliance and corporate gas reporting, while also influencing longer-term energy procurement choices. Its value depends on how well certification is managed, whether the underlying data can withstand scrutiny, and how consistently documentation can be applied across different regulatory and voluntary contexts as well. At Nvalue, we work with industrial companies, utilities, fuel suppliers, and the likes on the design and management of biomethane certification strategies. with a focus on technical robustness and regulatory alignment as well, rather than just headline claims. For companies currently evaluating how certified biomethane fits within their broader decarbonisation or compliance approach, we're here to support you in ensuring that any use of certificates is defensible, consistent across reporting frameworks, and resilient to regulatory change as well.